The only good non-human is a dead non-human.
I will be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf!
The lesser races must be purged from the kingdom.
Racism can be fun.
Uh-oh, retard alert! Retard alert, class!
Presenting the short bus veteran. In our stories, racism is pretty much a part of all of our fantasy worlds or universe or whatever you want to say. There's always something like that incorporated into it. Like even D&D has racism in it, right? The tieflings. Nobody likes the tieflings because they're demon blood. Some people might say, if you're going to create a fantasy world all up in your head, why would you put racism in it? Well, because it creates challenge and obstacles. And I don't know if you knew this, but challenge and obstacles are fun in story. It's kind of what they're really made of. Making that point is like saying, why don't you make a world where everyone's in a bubble and nobody's able to hurt anyone, and there's no disease, and there's no Dark Lord, and there's no nothing. So what do we have? No challenge or anything like that? I'm not saying you have to have racism in a world, but that could be dull. We need obstacles in our universe to have a fun story. Because that's what all stories really are a collection of obstacles and watching a characters overcome those obstacles. Like let's say you have your fantasy party with a dwarf in it, and you're about to go see another group of elves. And elves don't like dwarves. How are you going to deal with this situation? Interesting. A challenge has been put into your story. Without racism in stories like this, we wouldn't have the cool interactions like we have in Lord of the Rings between Legolas and Gimli. It's fun in stories when you have different characters of different races that don't exist in our world and kind of see how they might react to each other, how their cultures evolve, and how those cultures interact with other cultures. And you know what? I don't know if you know this, there's probably going to be a little bit of side effect of cultures not clashing well. There's probably going to be a little bit of racism because people, and probably other fantasy races along with that or anything, they're probably going to do more than just judge people based off their culture, possibly maybe their skin color, or because it's a fantasy race, maybe actually a lot deeper things like that. Maybe like they have razor teeth and they only eat humans. That's a part of their race feature. They only eat humans. Should we maybe be a little bit racist to the race of creatures that only eat humans? It's a dietary thing. They have to. Should we just be like, I don't know, let's let them be? And it's important to remember that, just like in my orcs videos, these fantasy races are not human. They can have features about them that make them evil. Now, one thing that this is kind of divulged even worse, I've seen it more and more in video games, especially with D&D. With games, you have different races have different class features, maybe more points, right? You have a giant orc, so hey, they got strength buff, right? You have an elf, they probably have an intelligence buff. Oh no, wait. You saying the elves are more intelligent than the orcs? You can't do that. And that's kind of the direction we see a lot of these games going, is where even just stat bonuses, it feels like they're mellowing out and just trying to make everything just a different costume and not actually different. When you play a game, especially a role-playing game, you want to get into character and you want to feel like you're playing a different race. Like if you pick a different fantasy race, can we feel like we're playing a different race? And I think it's really important to state again that all these fantasy races are not supposed to be allegory for actual human races. No, they're supposed to be non-human races. Therefore, I don't want them to act human. Let's talk Warcraft, for example.
We humans have to stick together.
We have a race of an undead. How do they reproduce? Well, they have to raise people from the dead. A lot of people don't like their ancestors or their siblings being raised from the dead. But the undead clan race or whatever, they don't want their people to go extinct. So they need to raise the dead. So that's a conflict. How do they come over it? I don't know. It's probably going to involve a lot of fighting between a lot of different races. Let's talk Lord of the Rings. Talk about the orcs and how they are evil. They're not gray. They're evil. So I don't know, if an orc shows up to a town, there's probably more of them. What are you going to be like? Hey, do you want food? No, you're probably going to go get your bow, your sword or something like that and get ready for him to try to kill you. Because that's what they're going to do. And let's get into maybe Warhammer 40k. Is there racism there? Maybe?
Racist? Space Marines aren't racist. We love all races. As long as they don't have green skin.
I might be the only one that thinks that Warhammer 40k is fun.
We don't hate any races, except orcs, and Eldar, and Dark Eldar, and Necrons, and Tau, because nobody likes dumbass weeaboo space communists.
Like, why in any fantasy world are any two races fighting each other? Racism has to be included in there somewhere, right? Like, imagine somebody killing an orc just because they're racist against orcs. Like, they have a whole history where orcs kill their family, so they hate them. And then somebody looking at this in this story and being like, this is just like me being Mexican. Like, can we not have slaves in any form in any fantasy race because that's tied to some race in some situations? Where does this arbitrary line exist in this fantasy world reminding you of real world events? Like, damn, if you got bullied, can we not have any bullying in a fantasy world? Because God forbid you were bullied and it's going to bring back bad memories? No, escape. Like, no, the DM puts me in internment camp. How can you do this? Don't you know I'm Asian? And the whole thing with, it's escapism. We're here to escape. Yes, you're escaping, but you're escaping into a world of conflict with no consequence, because this conflict and everything doesn't have any actual consequence on you. There's consequence on the characters in the story. But yeah, we get to escape into a world of conflict and live this out without any actual repercussions of that stuff. Not to say that you can't escape into a world without conflict. If you want to go do that, sure. Sounds boring as shit to me, though. And probably anyone else interested in any form of action or people being killed in a story. Let's be real here. Are you so fucking retarded that you're experiencing some sort of oppression because of some made-up creature and how they're treating you? Like, in this world of bad people doing bad things, can we only go up against dragons or dragon-like stuff? But wait a minute. Dragons in a lot of fantasy, D&D included, they're intelligent. So, I mean, how is having a dragon killing you any different than like a whole faction of orcs? Like, why is the dragon attacking us? Why are we attacking the dragon? Are we racist against the dragons? See how this factor of racism almost becomes inevitable in a story? Not saying it's completely inevitable, but it is a root of a lot of conflict in story. Let's talk Stormlight for a second here, because sometimes people can't look past skin stuff. And in that story, we have racism, but in a version where it comes to the people's eye colors. In that world, they call the people bright eyes or dark eyes. The bright eyes are noble, and while the dark eyes are obviously the lower class. It was a really interesting aspect of the story that the main character, being dark eyes, couldn't move up the ranks because of some of the features of how he was born. And then once he magically did get bright eyes, and how that completely changed his world and how the world would react to him, really interesting conflict and stuff like that. And, you know, when you talk about role-playing games, it's like, why would that not be something interesting to have thrown in there as well? Why would you be scared of having that thrown into a story? And this is a point I want to hammer into. Racism creates realism in a fictional universe. But wait, this is fantasy. Escapism. Why do we need to ground our fantasy universe in realism? And grounding a fantasy universe in realism is really a video topic on its own. But are we going to sit here and try to argue with me that if we just had anything goes in a universe, like a lightning bolt can do this, that, or whatever, it can change somebody into a lamb, and we're never going to explain how, and how much that ungrounds you from that universe. Like, no, you need aspects, even in a fantasy world, to ground you into some sort of believability. People a lot smarter than me, obviously, I'm riding the fucking short bus, have said the same thing. J.R. Tolkien has stated as such, that you need to have some believable aspects in a story. The story maker proves a successful sub-creator. He makes a secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true. It accords with the laws of that world. You therefore believe it while you are, as it were, inside. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. By J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, am I supposed to believe if, like, an elf murdered my character's entire family, like, enslaved his ancestors, kicked his dog, that he wouldn't be a little racist? If Gollum falls into the volcano and walks out just fine with zero explanation as to what the hell just happened, everybody's gonna be pissed. Let's talk about my favorite fantasy story for a second. A story that was written by an Asian woman. Full Metal Alchemist. And would you look at that, there's racism in that story as well. Kind of a big aspect. And I'm not trying to make the point that it's crucial to having a good story, but racism was a major aspect in this story that's looked as probably the best anime ever made. It's #1 on most people's charts. So what we can say is racism, a giant aspect of Full Metal Alchemist, is what helped make it really good. Because if you take that out, I'm sure Full Metal Alchemist wouldn't be as good. In fact, it was probably one of the most major conflicts in that story. I mean, without racism, do we even really get Full Metal Alchemist? Because that whole story of, killing all the red-eyed, darker-skinned people kind of kicked off the story. And what I'm getting down to with this is that racism adds a realistic, big conflict into your story, and is something that really should look into using in your story. It's also adding depth into the characters or the culture of entire civilizations of your universe. And as always, guys, if you made it this far, I got some news for you. You're retarded. But that's okay, because everybody's already retarded. It's just whether if you know it or not. We're just cool guys who are able to acknowledge it. So join me, subscribe to the channel, and get more retarded, highly autistic content.